Greetings everyone. Today we will discuss subject matter of construction. Before anything else, just a disclaimer. The individual behind this YouTube channel created this video as a means of studying the subject. He is a law student, not a lawyer. He is only sharing his insights and understanding on the subject statutory construction. Let's begin. In this discussion, we will necessarily touch certain doctrines and principles in constitutional law. While this requires an extensive discussion, I will try to make it as simple as possible. So first things first, what is a law? In the book of Ruben Nagpalo, he defined law as, in its jural and generic sense, it refers to the whole body or system of law. In its jural and concrete sense, law means a rule of conduct formulated and made obligatory by legitimate power of the state. It includes statutes enacted by the legislature, presidential decrees, and executive orders issued by the president in the exercise of his legislative power, other presidential issuances in the exercise of his ordinance power, rulings of the Supreme Court construing the law, rules and regulations promulgated by administrative or executive orders pursuant to a valid delegated power, and ordinances passed by sanguinas of local government units. So why do we have laws? Simply because the state, in its exercise of police power, it has the power to enact laws to promote the general welfare of the people. This inherent power does not need to be expressed in any provisions of the Constitution. Kahit pa i-control F mo ang Constitution, wala kang makikitang police power dyan because it is inherent. As soon as the country becomes a state, then it automatically acquires inherent power of police power. So we will learn this more in our constitutional law discussion in the future. For that subject, we will discuss comprehensively and extensively the three inherent powers of the state. So what is a constitution? A constitution is a system of fundamental laws for the governance and administration of a nation. It is supreme, imperious, absolute, and unalterable, except by the authority from which it emanates. It has been defined as the fundamental and paramount law of the nation. So why is it called supreme? Why is it called fundamental? Because it is the highest among all other laws in our country. Every law must bow down to the Constitution. So, in other words, no law or contract or any norm can contravene the Constitution. So what is the purpose of Constitution? It prescribes the permanent framework of a system of government. It assigns to the different departments their respective powers and duties and establishes certain fixed principles on which government is founded. So you can take note of the code PAE or PAE. So if you are asked during recitation or examinations, just keep in mind the code PAE. Always remember that if you are asked regarding what is a constitution, always cite the landmark case of Manila Prince Hotel versus JSIS. Under the doctrine of constitutional supremacy, if a law or contract violates any norm of the Constitution, that law or contract, whether promulgated by the legislative or by the executive branch or entered into by private persons for private purposes, is null and void and without any force and effect. Thus, since the Constitution is the fundamental, paramount, and supreme law of the nation, it is deemed written in every statute and contract. So, this explains the point that I was trying to make earlier, that the Constitution is the supreme law of the state. So, this is actually the concept of constitutional supremacy. So, ang Constitution talaga ang pinakamataas. Hindi dapat mag-violate ang contract, law, or any statute doon sa Constitution. Ang Constitution should at all times prevail. So, question. We mentioned earlier that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Question, can the Congress enact a law requiring candidates for senators undergo drug tests? The answer is no. Why? Because under Article 6 of the Constitution, drug test is not one of the requirements to be eligible for senator. If the Congress will add another qualification, then it contravenes the Constitution. So that's how the doctrine of constitutional supremacy works. Under Article 6 of the Constitution, no person shall be a senator unless he is a natural born citizen of the Philippines and on the day of the election is at least 35 years of age, able to read and write, a registered voter, a resident of the Philippines for not less than 2 years immediately preceding the day of the election. So, does it include mandatory drug tests? No. If not, then we cannot, even the most brilliant Congress can add. Kung anong nasa saligang batas, wala tayong choice kundi sundin natin. No matter how noble the law is, no matter how good its intentions are, if it contravenes the Constitution, that law should be declared invalid. Right or wrong, the Constitution should be followed as long as it has not been changed by the sovereign people. So, let's go to statutes. These are legislations issued in the form of Republic Acts. So we know that the power to make laws is lodged in the legislative department of the government. Our constitution is explicit on this matter. The legislative power shall be vested in the Congress of the Philippines, which consists of a Senate and a House of Representatives. So it has the authority to make, alter, or repeal laws. So this is the provision of the Constitution under Article 6, Section 1. So we also have to determine whether a statute is permanent or temporary. When we say permanent, it means one whose operation is not limited in duration but continues until repealed. It does not terminate by the lapse of a period or by the occurrence of an event. Neither disuse nor custom or practice to the contrary operates to render it ineffective or inoperative. So it continues until repealed. So you might be wondering, why is it called permanent when it can actually be repealed? Because the answer to that question, the well-established rule is that Congress cannot pass irrepealable laws. What is an irrepealable law? For example, Republic Act 123456 was passed and cannot be repealed, meaning the future Congress cannot change or modify Republic Act 123456. It will be effective, okay? It will be effective forever. What will happen? The power of future Congress will be limited. Is that allowed? No. Because if you will limit the power of Congress, you are also violating the Constitution. We mentioned earlier that the Congress has the power to make, alter, and repeal laws. So you cannot pass an irrepealable law. Second, we have temporary statute. One whose duration is for a limited period of time fixed in the statute itself or whose life ceases upon the happening of an event. Where a statute provides that it shall be in force for a definite period, it terminates at the end of such period. If you remember our discussion in Araneta versus Dinglasan, it was about Commonwealth Act 671. It was passed by the National Assembly, which was temporary in its character. Why is it temporary? Because it was enacted to meet an emergency. Again, is repealing clause required for it to cease? In the case of Araneta versus Dinglasan, it was decided by the Supreme Court that it is not, okay, it is not required. So let's discuss the brief legislative summary, brief legislative process in the Philippines. So as a general rule, a member of either house may present a proposed bill signed by him. The bill is filed with the office of the secretary where it is given a corresponding number and calendared for the first reading. During the first reading, what will happen? The principal author of the bill may propose the inclusion of additional authors thereof. The bill is read by its number and title and name or names of author or authors. As a general rule, a member of either House, Senate, or House of Representatives may propose a bill. So the exception is under Article 6, Section 24 of the Constitution. It says that all appropriation, revenue or tariff bills, bills authorizing increase of public debt, bills of local application, and private bills shall originate exclusively in the House of Representatives. Okay, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments. So that's the exception. Second, referral to the appropriate committee. The bill is referred to the appropriate committee for study and consideration. It may conduct hearing and consultation meetings. It then approves the bill with or without amendments or recommends substitution or consolidation with similar bills filed. If disapprove the bill, it dies in a natural death unless the House decides otherwise following the submission of report. So after passing the first reading, it will be referred to the appropriate committee for study and consideration. In the Senate and House of Representatives, there are various committees. For example, committees on environment, committees on amendments to the Constitution, and the likes. So depending on the nature of the bill, the appropriate committee that can be tasked to handle such for study and consideration will be the one who will handle it. Next, second reading. What will happen? If the committee approves the bill, it will be forwarded to the Committee on Rules so that it can be calendared for deliberation on second reading. At this stage, the bill is read for the second time in its entirety, together with the amendments, if any, by the committee, unless the reading is disproved by the majority vote of the House. So as a general rule, the uh, the in second reading, you will read the entirety together with the amendments, if any, unless it is disproved by majority vote of the House. So debate. A general debate is held after the second reading and sponsorship speech of the author of the bill. Amendments can be proposed by any members of Congress. A bill approved on second reading shall be included in the calendar bills for the third reading. So amendments can be proposed by any members of Congress at this stage. But you have to take note that amendments or the insertion of changes shall be in accordance with the rules of either house. The house can either kill or pass the bill. So next, printing and distribution. The bill is ordered printed in its final form or version, and copies of it are distributed among the members of the House 3 days before its passage, except in case of bills certified by the President. Next, third reading. Only the title of the bill is read on the floor. Nominal voting is held. Upon the last reading of the bill, no amendment thereto is allowed, and the vote thereon is immediately taken thereafter. Yeas and nays are entered in the journal. Next, referral to the other house. If approved, the bill is then referred to the other house where substantially the same procedure takes place. If the other house approves the bill without changes or amendments, the final version is signed by the Senate President and the Speaker of the House of Representatives. So that's how it works. The bill will now be transmitted to the other house after its approval. For example, the bill was approved in the Senate. It will now be referred to the House of Representatives. After that, the bill will be signed by the Senate President and the Speaker of the House. That is, okay, that is if there are no amendments. But what if, let's say there are amendments, what will happen? It will now be submitted to a joint bicameral committee. So if there are differences between two versions of the bill, it should be submitted to a conference committee of members of both houses. What is the purpose? For compromise or to reconcile conflicting provisions. So that's how the joint bicameral committee works. Can this committee propose several provisions? The answer is yes. Okay. So if they can propose two provisions. Why can it propose several provisions? So, so long as such amendment is germane to the subject of the bills before the committee, then it is allowed. So for example, the bill is about divorce. The bicameral committee cannot propose amendments including a provision on same-sex marriage because divorce is not the same as same-sex marriage. So that's the general concept of bicameral committee. So we will discuss this further in our constitutional law 1 lectures in the future. So to reconcile or harmonize disagreeing provisions, the bicameral conference committee may then adopt the specific provisions of either House bill or Senate bill, decide that neither provisions in the House bill or the provisions in the Senate bill will be carried into final form of the bill, and or try to arrive at a compromise between disagreeing provisions. So that's what will happen after reconciling the bill. So, submission to the President. This is the last step. A bill approved on third reading by both houses shall be printed and forthwith transmitted to the President for his action. Approval or disapproval, that is, he either signs it into law or vetoes and sends it back with his veto message. So if the President does not communicate his veto of any bill to the House where it originated within 30 days from the receipt thereof, it shall become a law as if he signed it. Now, the professor will ask you during recitation, can a bill become a law without the signature of the President? Or let's say the professor will ask you, should all bills be signed by the President to become law? What is the answer? The answer is no. Why? Because the President, under this provision, has three options. First, sign it into law. Second, veto it. And third, by not acting on it. So if the President will not act on the bill, it shall become a law after 30 days, as if he signed it. So it is not really a requirement that all laws should be signed by the President. So another question that your professor might ask, what if the President vetoes the bill? What can the Congress do? Under Article 6, Section 27, Paragraph 1 of the Constitution, the Congress may override the veto of the President. So let's go to presidential issuances. Under the President's ordinance power, the President can enact the following. First, we have executive orders. It provides for rules of general or permanent character in the implementation or execution of constitutional or statutory powers. For example, the power of the President over executive branches. By virtue of that power, the President wants to create office. So that's a proper subject of executive orders. Next, we have administrative orders. It relates to a particular aspect of governmental operations in pursuance of his duties as administrative head. Since the President is also the administrative head, he can issue administrative order. For example, the President grants certain incentives to all of the employees of the government. So that's a proper subject of administrative order. Next, we have proclamations. It fixes a date or declaring a status or condition of public moment or interest upon the existence of which the operation of a specific law or regulation is made to depend. For example, the President declares holiday throughout the country. Or, for example, the President declares martial law. So that's a proper subject of proclamation. Next, we go to memorandum orders. There are matters of administrative detail or subordinate or temporary interest that concerns a particular officer or office of the government. So, in memorandum order, it affects only a particular government agency, as opposed to administrative order where it affects the entire administration of the government. So that's how we distinguish the two. Next, we have memorandum circulars. They are matters relating to internal administration which the President desires to bring to the attention of all or some of the departments, agencies, bureaus, or offices of the government for information or compliance. So, in memorandum circulars, it is for the purpose of administration of a particular agency of the government. For example, when the President informs executive departments about internal processes of the Office of the President na kapag ikaw ay magsasubmit ng document sa opisina ko, ganito ang proseso. So that's a proper subject of memorandum circulars. So next, we have general or special orders, acts or commands in his capacity as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. We know that the President is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces in the Philippines. That's actually a provision under our Constitution. So for example, the President is commanding the AFP to do something. For example, martial law. Okay? So now you might be thinking, we mentioned again martial law. We said it is for proclamation, di ba? So how do we reconcile that? In proclamation, it is addressed to the public. In general order or special order, it is addressed to the AFP or the Armed Forces of the Philippines. So that's the distinction between the two. So we go to implementing rules and regulations. They're issued by executive agencies tasked with the implementation of laws passed by Congress. They are issued by administrative agencies as well in the exercise of their quasi-legislative powers. This is actually a delegated power by the legislature. So now the professor will ask you during recitation, is an implementing order, implementing rules or regulation allowed to contravene the law that they are implementing? The answer is no. So let's go to the non-delegation of powers. So as a general rule, a delegated power cannot be delegated. Exception, delegation to administrative agencies. So why do we have this rule? It is because the solutions to the problems that the legislature faces may be expected from its delegates, which are the administrative agencies, who are supposed to be experts in the particular fields assigned to them. So that's the wisdom. So how to determine whether or not the delegation is valid? Okay. So first we have the completeness test. When it sets forth therein the policy to be executed, carried out, or implemented by the delegate. Next, we have sufficient standard test. When it provides adequate guidelines or limitations in the law to map out the boundaries of the delegate's authority and present the delegation from running riot. So here, the administrative agencies can actually fill in the details which the Congress may not have the opportunity or competence to provide. So that's the purpose actually of what we mentioned earlier, the implementing rules and regulations. The IRR or implementing rules and regulations issued by the administrative agencies have the force and effect of a law, but they must, again, they cannot be in violation of the law that they are trying to implement. They must be germane to the objects and purpose of the law. Okay? So it should be necessarily limited to what is provided for in the legislative enactment. So if there is a conflict arising between the two, the legislative enactment shall prevail. So we have here the local government code. So this is actually the general welfare clause under the local government. So this is allowed under the local government code because our local government can exercise police power. As we all know, police power, we mentioned earlier, that it is inherent in the state. So the local government, being part of the government, can actually enact policies for the protection of the public, or in other words, for the general welfare. So let's have a scenario. For example, let's have a hypothetical scenario. There is a university. Let's call it University X. Then, in front of University X, there is a bar. Now, students regularly go to this bar, so resulting to their poor academic performance. Halimbawa, yung iba hindi na pumapasok. Can the local government order that bar to be closed? The answer is yes. Why? Because it is promoting public morals pursuant to police power. Because ang estudyante dapat nag-aaral yan. Hindi yan dapat nasa bar sa oras ng klase. So, in that case, the local government can promote public morals. So, substantive requirements. So, these are the substantive requirements of ordinances as enunciated in Magtahas versus Price Properties Corporation. So, take note of the keyword CUPTP. Okay? So, it must not contravene the Constitution or any statute. It must not be unfair, oppressive, or unreasonable. It must not be partial or discriminatory. It must not prohibit but regulate trade. So the reason is very obvious. Why do we have these substantive requirements? The delegate, okay, the delegate cannot be superior to the principal, or in other words, it cannot exercise power higher than those of the principal. The local government units, take note, cannot undo any acts of the Congress. So we have the last requirement. It must be general and consistent with public policy. So those are the substantive requirements for an ordinance to be valid. So let's go to parts of the statute. First, we have title. Under Article 6, Section 26, every bill passed by Congress shall embrace only one subject which shall be expressed in the title thereof. What is the purpose of this? We have this concept of one title, one subject rule. It is actually enshrined in the Constitution. The purpose is to prohibit duplicity in legislation, the title of which completely fails to apprise the legislators or the public of the nature, scope, and consequences of the law or its provisions. So in other words, laws should receive a reasonable, not technical construction. It is sufficient that the title is comprehensive enough to include the general object which a statute seeks to effect. So let's have here. So what will happen if there is a conflict between the body and the title? Which one should prevail? Is it the body or the title? So as a rule, in the case of City of Baguio versus Marcos, it was enunciated therein that the title expresses in the it expresses in language clear and very substance of the law itself. So the title is actually the index of or clue or guide to legislative intention. It belongs to the type of rules of provisions expressed in the body. So while the title throws light on the meaning of the statute itself, it is an available tool for the resolution of doubt. So this one, the one on the screen, was enunciated in the case of Philippine Judges Association versus Prado. So when you are asked, the most direct purpose is for ascertaining the legislative intent. So if you are asked about the purpose of one subject, one title, one subject rule, it is for the purpose of ascertaining legislative intent when the language of the act does not clearly express its purpose. Whenever there is doubt, clarity to that doubt may be resorted in the title, which, as we said, limits only one subject. Okay? So we answered the question earlier. In other words, in case of conflict between the body and the title, the one that should prevail is the title. Okay? Take note of that. Next, we have preamble. It is the introductory part of the statute that states the reasons and intent of the law. It may aid in the construction of doubtful or ambiguous provisions of a statute, but they cannot, okay, take note, they cannot be used to control the substantive provisions of a statute. It is the key of the statute to open the minds of the makers as to the mischiefs which are to be remedied. So basically, it is just the key of the statute. It can be resorted to cure the ambiguity, but it is not a source of right. You cannot assert your right and then invoke the preamble in the statute. When the statute is in itself clear, you cannot do that. We will always go back to the cardinal rules of construction. In Verbalehis, we said in chapter 1 that when the law is clear, there is no need for construction. So when the law is clear, there is no need to resort to the preamble. Next, we have enacting clause. It declares enactment and identifies the one who enacts it. So enactment, if it is enacted by Congress, then it is put therein. For example, this part is usually the part which says that be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the Philippines. So that's what you call the enacting clause. So we have the body. It contains the operative parts, substantive and procedural, and may contain the following. Short title. It provides simple and easy designation of statutory enactment, definition of terms. It controls the definition of the statute regardless, okay, if it has different meaning in ordinary usage. Policy section. It enumerates the objectives and the policy it seeks to uphold. Substantive provisions, rights, privileges, and immunities of persons benefited of the statute. Next, we have penal clause, provides for the sanctions that may be imposed against persons for violations. So we have also head notes and epigraphs. It describes the body of the statute for a convenient index of the contents of the body of the statute. So no need to resort to head note and or epigraph where such merely contains catchwords or references. So they are secondary aids of construction and shall not be resorted to if it creates doubt. Because again, the primary purpose of statutory construction is to ascertain and give effect to the intent of the legislature. It is not for the purpose of making doubts. This was a duplicated page. Apologies for that. So we have repealing clause. It identifies the previous statute that was repealed as a result of the new statute, even if it was not specifically identified to have been repealed. If their provisions are inconsistent, the provisions of the statute should be deemed impliedly repealed. It is but reasonable to conclude that passing a statute, it was not intended to interfere with or abrogate any former law relating to some matter unless repugnancy between the two is not only irreconcilable, but also clear and convincing and flowing necessarily from the language used unless the latter act fully embraces the subject matter of the earlier or unless the reason for the earlier act is beyond the peradventure renewed. So there are two kinds of implied repeal. Okay, repeal by irreconcilable contradiction. It means the provisions of the new act of the same subject matter are irreconcilably contradictory to the previous act as to constitute implied repeal. Next, we have repeal by substitution, when it covers the whole subject matter of the earlier statute and clearly intended to be a substitution. So those are the two kinds of implied repeal. So statutes are not deemed repealed by implication unless the legislative intent is manifest. Next, we have separability clause. Make the statute's parts or provisions severable so that one part can be invalidated without invalidating the whole. If a is invalidated, then the other portions that are separable from the invalidated one may stand and be enforced. It is not controlling, and the courts may still invalidate the entire statute where what is left. It is presumed that the legislative to intended a statute to be effective as a whole. If separation of the statute will defeat the intent of the legislature, such separation will not be countenanced. So, what is the purpose of separability clause? The separability clause kasi, in simplest terms, is to inform the people of what will happen if a part of the statute is invalidated. Let's say a part of it was declared unconstitutional. Will the whole statute be invalidated or just that part? So that's the purpose. Now, here's a tricky scenario. What if the part that is declared unconstitutional is actually necessary for the enforcement of the whole statute? In other words, kapag tinanggal natin ang isang invalidated provision, mawawala ng bisa ang buong statute. What will happen? The answer is, we cannot therefore consider that separability clause to be effective. Bale, we will invalidate the whole statute. Why? Again, the purpose of statutory construction is to ascertain and give effect the intent of the legislature. So if resorting to the separability clause will defeat the intent of the legislature, it shall not be followed. So effectivity clause. This is the last part. Provision when the law takes effect. Okay, under Article 2 of the Civil Code, law shall take effect after 15 days following the completion of their publication in the official gazette unless it is otherwise provided. So the effectivity clause is the last part. We learned in the previous chapter, as held in Tanyada versus Tuvera, that the phrase unless it is otherwise provided refers to the date of effectivity and not to the requirement of publication. Because why? Publication is part of the due process. So, thank you for listening. May your love for the law remain strong as always. Maraming salamat.